Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Laura Gasco. I'm really pleased to be here. At the same time, I'm a little bit afraid to be in the session of LCA because, well, I really have no idea about LCA. So today I'm here to tell you something about insects and their application, their use in aquafeed. In fact, we are going to speak more about insects rather than about aquafeed. I think it's a little bit more, I would say, new and interesting. And today I will try to tell you why we should use insects in aquafeed, and also a little bit on how we can use them. So why use insects in aquafeed? Well, we know that we have a growing population. We expect to have about 9.5 billion people by 2050, and we expect to have an increase in the demand of the consumption of product of animal origin. To increase the consumption of product of animal origin, we will need to increase the production of product of animal origins, and that means that we will need to increase the production of feed because animals need feed. According to the last data from the Alltech report, the 2021 feed production accounts for 1.2 billion tons of feed that has been produced. And if you look at aquaculture represents about the 5% of this feed, so about 51 million tons of feed produced for aquaculture. And clearly, as you can see on the graph on your right, aquaculture increased in the last 30 years in a quite constant way. Now aquaculture equal the global capture production, and all the increase in the aquaculture, in the feed consumption will be thanks to aquaculture. So we will need to increase also the production of feed for aquaculture. Since some years, we know that the ingredients, and in particular the protein part of the feeds, is an issue. We are facing quite huge problems of feed shortage in the last year, also due to the particular political situation we are facing. But the protein issue is not new. In Europe, we import about the 70% of the protein that we are including in our feed. And we are looking for alternative proteins, for alternative ingredients. And insects can be one of these alternatives, not the only one. There are other alternatives that are evaluated. Insect, I would say that they are more appeal. They are more the one that, also from an emotional point of view, give some reaction to people. We are looking for insects for feed, of course, but when we see insects, we think about food. And when we think about food, the idea of eating insects, it is something that is not so common for us, even if there are countries where insects are commonly used for food. So insects are clearly sustainable ingredients, and they can be applied in the composition. They can be used to formulate feeds for animals and for fish. So why? The first reason would be, I would say, the nutritional value, and this is the first reason why the insects were considered as very important for the inclusion in animal feeds. Insects being of animal origin contains a very nice content in protein and a very nice profile in essential amino acids. Usually animal proteins perform better from a profile in essential amino acid if compared to plant proteins. They contain a quite huge amount of lipids. In particular, the insects that undergo a larva stage used to accumulate during the larval period quite high amount of lipid. We can go up to 35–40% of lipid content, and clearly the lipid is characterized by different fatty acid profile that are specific from insect to insect. And insects also contain vitamin and minerals. The composition, the nutritional value of insects is clearly depending on the species. The amino acid profile of Nermetia illucens will not be the same of a Tenebrio molitor or of Musca domestica in terms of essential amino acids. The fatty acid profile will be different, and in particular, the black soldier fly, that is the Hermetia illucens, that is, I would say, the most recognized insect species for feed production, is very particular for a fatty acid profile, as it contains a quite huge amount, up to 40–45% of lauric acid, that is saturated fatty acid with 12 atoms of carbon. The nutritional composition of insects depend on the stage. So within the same species, if you consider the early stage, so the first instar of the insects, the composition will be different from the last instars. In particular, in the first stage, we will have a higher content in protein, while in the end stage, in the last instar, we will have a quite high content in chitin. The composition, the nutritional value is linked to the substrate we are using to rear insects. That means that the substrate is the feed that you are delivering to insects. Insects are animals, they need to be fed. And modulating, changing the substrate will have an impact on the composition of your insects. And the fraction that will be impacted will be the one, mainly the one of lipids, not the one of protein. But through the substrate, you can modulate the composition and the fatty acid profile of your insect. And you can also modulate the composition in vitamin and minerals. And clearly, the nutritional value also depend on the process you are applying to your product. So at the end of your rearing process, you have a biomass, you have an insect biomass, and you can process it. And depending on how you process, you will have a final product, an insect meat that will have a different nutritional value depending on the process you have applied. And clearly, when we speak about process, we have to be careful about the kind of process we are applying, the temperature, the pressure we are applying to our product, as this can impact the digestibility and the bioavailability of the different nutrients. Insects, why insects? Well, insects are amazing bioconverters. Insects can transform very low value biomass that are not otherwise used into nutrients of high biological value, such as protein and lipids. And if you think about the huge quantity of waste that we have, the possibility of using insects to bioconvert those waste into protein and lipid is amazing. And well, from the impact, insects are considered to be sustainable. They have a low soil use. You can rear insects using the verticality of the space. They have a low greenhouse gas emissions. They have good feed conversion ratio. The insects that are used for the feed production, clearly we control all the life cycle. We control the mass production. They have a rapid growth. And not the last important thing is they are part of the natural diet of many animals. And if you think about carnivorous species, usually carnivorous species used to eat insects in their natural diet. So that means that they are quite physiologically adapted to fish. Not everything is green. We also have some red points, some issue. And I would say, especially if you consider Europe, we have issue of temperature. Insects need to be reared at high temperature, depending usually 27 to 30 degrees to rear insect. And this temperature has to be kept all over the year constant. So this is a cost from an energetic point of view. So we need to find green sources of energy to warm the environment of insects. And the other point is substrate. In particular, in Europe, I've told you that insects are powerful bioconverters and they can use waste that are not otherwise valorized. But clearly, in Europe, we have a quite strict legislation. And as insects are considered as rare animals, they are farmed animals, they cannot be fed with waste. That means that in Europe, we have a quite huge restriction on the substrate we can use to rear insects. And this limits the sustainability of the insects. The Commission, the European Commission, is working to find new substrate that are not, used in another way to enable insects to be really sustainable. Why insects? Insects contain proteins, they contain lipids, they contain vitamins, they contain minerals, but they also contain bioactive compounds that can be really interesting. They contain antimicrobial peptides. Why do they contain antimicrobial peptides? Because if you think about where insects used to live, the quite harsh environment they used to live, they produce naturally antimicrobial peptide to defend themselves against the bacteria and the pathogens that are present in these environments. Insects contains chitin. Chitin is the structural polysaccharides that form the exoskeleton of insects. And the content of chitin depend on the insect species, on the stage. But we can see about from 4–5% up to 10–12% of chitin. And they contain particular fatty acids, such as the lauric acid, that is rich in the black soldier fly larvae. And lauric acid, chitin, and antimicrobial peptides have some very interesting properties. They can have antimicrobial effects, they can boost the immune system, they can modulate the microbiota of the animal. They have antioxidant effect, and if you consider the problems we are facing now for the antimicrobial resistance, to be able to have some natural molecules, some natural bioactive compounds to be used in animal feed is of huge importance. And well, there are many papers. You can have some information, and I can send them to you if you want. Just to give you some idea about the very interesting bioactive compounds present in insects and in their effect, this is the research using Tenebrio monitor larva meal in the yellow catfish, and they included at 9, 18, and 27% into the diet, and they find that fish that were fed 18% of Tenebrio monitor diet, 3 minutes, oh my God. Well, they had, the important is look at when you challenge the fish with cell-like calorie, they had the decrease in the mortality. And the same things was found for red sea bream. And here it's an effect on the microbiota modulation. You see, using insect will modulate the microbiota of your fish towards good bacteria that will put the fish into a better health conditions, to a better ability to resist to disease. And once again, some other papers. Examples of circular economy. Insects are a perfect example of circular economy. You use waste, you produce animal feed. What left from the insect rearing, so the frass, will be used as fertilizer, and they can really be a very interesting source from an environmental point of view, but also from a social point of view. And this is the application for aquafeed. Well, in aquafeed, I will not tell you a lot about the aquafeed application. You have to consider that there are many papers. Aquafeed, in Europe at least, have been the first one where insects have been authorized to be used. We can use 8 insect species. And what's happened here? And there are many parameters that should be considered when you are including insect in aquafeed. Not only the insect species, but you have to consider the level of inclusion. Always think about level of inclusion rather than level of substitution. Level of substitution means nothing. You substitute clearly fish meal, that is the target commodities in the aquafeed. You substitute fish meal, but depending on the level of the fish meal you have in your control diet, you can have up to 100% of substitution, even including a very low level of insect meal. Another point that is very important, in my opinion, is the impact on the product quality and the perception of the consumer, which is the perception of the consumer on eating fish that has been fed using insects. Well, in fact, it has been seen that the consumer is quite positive with that. If you explain the story of insects, the sustainability, and why we should use insect in aquafeed, they are even willing to pay a higher price of the product to have such kind of fish. Once again, some other papers. And, well, this is my last slide. I know that 20 minutes is very short time to give you some food for thought about insects, but I just want to leave you with one sentence that is from Ogden Nash. God in his wisdom made the fly and then forgot to tell us why. And I hope that I give you some idea on why you should use insects in aquafeed, but also not only in aquafeed, but also in other animal feeds. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the audience or from the chat? We have one in the chat. Roy Kushik is asking, compared to insects raised on vegetable scraps, fruit peels, plant, forest leaf litters, the insect raised on cereals brands have much different nutrient profile or are not necessarily?
Well, clearly they will have a different nutrient profile. Usually it has been seen that when you are using very low value substrates, such as I would say plant or vegetables, only that to rare insects, the protein content will be lower because you will have a higher content in fat usually. Clearly the substrate will impact the composition of your insects. Consider one thing is that insects has to be considered as animals, and as such, you should deliver them a proper feed. That means a feed that is able to cover their nutritional requirements. There are not already all the nutritional requirements for the insects. We are working on that, but the idea is to combine the different waste in such way to have a diet that is formulated to cover the nutritional requirement of your insects. And that means in that case that you will be able to use different kind of waste to combine them in a proper way and to have very good growth and also a very good composition.
Another one, a big question, they said.
Maybe too big.
Maybe too big. With respect to the first slide about demand, one argument is that we need to double food production by 2050. Another argument is that we are producing more than enough food, but that inequalities and poverty prevents nutrition for all. What is correct, or maybe both?
Well, this has nothing to do with insects. It is correct. We are already producing more food than what we are able to eat. But at the same time, we are wasting a huge quantity. It's a question of inequity. There are places in the world where they don't have food enough, and there are places where we have too much food. I think that both are correct. I cannot really answer this question. I think that we should, well, maybe insects in those countries where the food is really an issue. That, well, in Western countries, food is not an issue, but there are places in the emerging countries in Africa where food is really, really an issue. I'm sure that their insects really make sense, because insect in that place can be rare at a very low price with very low-tech facilities using different kind of substrate. Clearly, the legislation is quite different. And in that case, they can really make the difference, as they can deliver not only direct food, but also proteins to be used in animal feed. And this can lower the input from outside, the provision for protein from outside, etc.
Thank you. Any other question? So, thank you.